In this video, we're going to be taking a look at how we can continue on with our design and we can push into the secondary and tertiary forms for this sculpt. In the previous sessions with the stone, we kept the secondary and the tertiary detail and those parts separate. But in this sculpt, what I was telling you about that's different about this material is there's not really that much of a surface change depth-wise on there. So the medium level detail and the tertiary detail, the fine level detail, are going to be pretty close to each other as far as how much of the surface we're going to change on here. So that's why I'm thinking it'd probably make more sense to just keep those two parts together. So you can see what I've sculpted here, and I want to show you how we can make some of these detail lines on here, some of these welds that we've got going on here, how we can keep nice, clean, high-res geometry. And I also want to talk to you about keeping independent shapes and making sure that we have enough resolution on each one of our pieces. So something that I notice with a lot of people's sculpts is that whenever they're first starting off, they want to take all their objects and they want to combine them all together into one big giant sculpt, and they want to Dynamesh that. And it probably makes sense from getting started trying to eliminate how many pieces you're working with and things like that. The problem is, as you start to work with these higher resolution models, your computer, Zbrush, does a much better job if these models are broken up into multiple models and they've got their own resolution to them. It manages the memory a bit better, and it manages just how fast the program runs and how responsive it is for the particular piece that you're working on. And when you're working with Dynamesh, you will hit a you'll hit a wall at some point for how much resolution you can actually put on those. So the first thing that I think that would be pretty important to talk about is how many different shapes that we have for everything. Okay, so if we take a look at this, you can see how I've organized everything. I'm going to close up these folders that we've got here. So I've got this base that we have here. I've got a midsection, a top, and then a cap for this. Okay, so I'm at least breaking it up into those different parts that we have here. And you can see I've already union meshed these things together on here. I booleaned these parts together. And you can see I've got this part here, and that's coming from this mid shape, and it hit it already. So I'm going to hide this shape. I'm going to go ahead and select this folder, turn it on, and you can see this is the base shape that was created first. So we've looked at this already in previous videos. It's really easy to make a new folder. You can make a new folder. You can put all your pieces within here. You tell it to start on a particular object, and if you want to have multiple starts within here, you can see I've got a start here for these what I was calling these wing shapes for the arms. And so after it booleans this together, since I've got one start, two starts within this folder structure, when I run that folder structure and boolean it, I'm going to get two different objects out of that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and go to the gearbox icon right here and just say boolean. And if you're working with dynamic subdivision levels, you're going to want to go ahead and use this boolean with dynamic subdiv. Go ahead and run that. It's going to calculate, take a little bit of time, take each one of the pieces, and it'll boolean it together with the instructions that you've given it. And then it'll take that folder and it'll hide it for you. And you can see here I've got these two different meshes like I was telling you. If I put it on solo right here, and then I'll turn on the polyframe, you can see how it joined the objects together. So it's done this very efficiently. As we look at the geometry, it looks horrible. It's not good topology, but that's not really the point of this. The point is it actually generating the shapes and then combining them together. So if you get too many pieces, this could be a problem in the next stage whenever we go to Dynamesh this together. But I think what we're doing, I don't think we're going to run into any kind of issues. So if you ever get this thing with Dynamesh where it turns your mesh into, it looks like Swiss cheese and there's a lot of problems, it's because you've got a lot of different polygroups and a lot of different little different islands, so different objects that it's trying to combine together. So strategy for that is merging pieces together, Dynameshing those in kind of groups and chunks, and then merging them together again, so you can kind of reduce how many of these smaller chunks you're Dynameshing together all at the same time. So I don't think you're going to run into that issue, but if you do, then there's definitely a video by Joseph Drust, a member of the Pixelogic team, that put out a video. I think it's one of the Did You Know series that kind of goes over why that happens. But I don't think we're going to hit that. I think we'll be just fine for this part. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these two meshes and I'm going to go and I'm going to merge these down. So if we go to the subtool area, go to merge, we'll say merge down, and it's going to merge this down to this. Does what it says. It's going to merge down just like that. Because I've got it on solo, now those are merged together and I can see these two objects together at this point. And now what I want to do, I want to turn this into Dynamesh and get a nice even distribution of topology across this. And if everything goes right with Dynamesh, it should actually keep the polygroup information that we've got on these different pieces, but we'll have a new one-piece model that's all Dynameshed and a little bit more uniform for the topology, like I was saying, because we cannot sculpt on this. If we try to sculpt on this, you can see how large these polygons are. This area would be just fine. This would do just fine here, but then we hit here and we cannot sculpt across there because we just don't have topology. So let's go open up geometry. You can hold down shift if you want to open that up and keep the subtool area open at the same time. It's up to you if you want to do that or not. So I'm going to go to Dynamesh, open that up. And then I'm going to try at least starting around 500. And I think when I start off to find out what the resolution of this is, that seems to be the go-to number that I've been going to a lot lately. So I'll just click Dynamesh, run this. And this resolution really has something to do with the scale of whatever that object is in the ZBrush scale units. It's probably a bit out of scope for this video to talk about that whole issue, and there's a problem with that. But if you want to avoid this whole thing, there is a Dynamesh master plugin that you can get, and you can type in a specific number for how many polys you want this to be. So normally you might just plug in a number of maybe about 1 million polygons and then hit that button, and that plugin will scale it to ZBrush's optimal scale for ZBrush. Then it will apply the Dynamesh to it, then rescale it to the size that you have. So it kind of you know, makes everything work behind the scenes. But this seems to work okay for me. I think this is a pretty decent amount of topology on here. If I turn the polyframe off and take a look at this, I can take a look real quick. If I hit undo, I can see I've got really nice crisp edges on here. So maybe what I'm going to do is I'm going to bump this up to, I'm going to go up to about 800. So I'll type that in, take the blur off, and then click Dynamesh again, and then wait for it to run through. And then sometimes I notice when ZBrush is doing these really heavy calculations, it takes a hold of the screen and it kind of drops the resolution of the screen. I don't know exactly what's going on behind the scenes with that, but don't be alarmed whenever you see that. Okay, so I think that's going to be enough resolution to kind of work with. And then the next thing that I would do immediately is take this polish and take off this little marker that's in the center of this. This makes it a lot stronger if you take that out of there. So this is like the full power of this polish. And I can go ahead and run this to about 48, somewhere in that vicinity. There's no perfect number for this. So I'll take a second for this. What it should do is round out my corners for me, and should make that look pretty nice. So what I've seen from professional users, whenever they go through this process and they're doing these really nice machined parts, and they want to get a really good bake for normal maps, if you're going to be doing stuff for games, running this polish, actually this little bit of beveling that it puts on there helps for the normal map information. So it looks pretty good. So I'll tap X to turn on my symmetry, and then the next part is let's talk about how we can start to build some secondary forms, and we'll do some stuff like putting welds on here, and then we can also roughen up our edges as well. Okay, so before we move on, I just want to reemphasize again that I think it would be smarter. You can see this is a pretty good sized chunk of my model. I wouldn't go too much more complex with something like this. And then if you got some other parts, like I've got this head part and a cap and the base, I'm going to keep those separate so I can keep ZBrush at a reasonable amount of geometry, and it keeps it kind of at least reasonable for us remeshing and things like that. Okay, so I'm going to put this on Trim Dynamic, and I'm going to just run through and hit some of these edges, and I'm not going to be super heavy-handed with this. The other thing that we can do with this one is we can go and take an alpha, and I like to put this maybe alpha 28 on here, so it's a nice square kind of shape. And then with this one, it just kind of, I don't know, to me it just feels like it maybe pushes down a little bit easier and just changes the look of this ever so slightly. And then if we want to do the welds instead of digging into this, we can hold down Alt and then Trim Dynamic will pull up a surface if you hold down Alt. And so you can see it almost kind of fills in these cracks for you. And so I'm just going to keep pushing along here. And I do have symmetry turned on, so I tapped X for that. And I'm going to try to go fairly quickly with this. I don't want to spend tons and tons of time on just trying to build these welds and things like that. And if this is supposed to be something more like a natural process, like someone's actually welding this together, it's going to be a bit of a chaotic process. It's not going to be this super pristine looking thing, you know. So you might want to go out and get a little bit of reference and take a look at some welds and things like that from metal sculptures, and you can see what I'm talking about for there. So it's always good to have reference. Don't forget that you can put reference back behind the ZBrush program, and you can just use the see-through, and you can dial back in and out, back and forth between things like that. And so I'll just hit some of these up like this and through here. And then I was going to show you this brush real quick. In previous videos, we've already taken a look at how we can use the lightbox. We can build a shortcut inside of Windows, and we can store brushes that way. And you can see I just used a shortcut to get where my brushes actually sit. I'm going to use this others folder, and I've got other people's brushes within here, and I'm going to go to the orb brush set. And he's got a really nice orb flatten edge protect. I think that's what it was called. Yep. And this one's really nice. I'm going to make the brush size a little bit larger. Just tap S on there. And we can see what this one might look like. I think he's got another one too. So this one feels like it would be pretty good for doing, just letting it slide across, and it does this almost kind of shearing effect. So it feels like it works a little bit better on these faces for larger surfaces. So I'm going to hit the command key and go back in here. Let's see what else. I thought there was another flatten potentially. We do have this extreme polish. I'm going to try that real quick. And I'll make my brush size a little bit smaller on that. And that one, I can flatten out surfaces, but yeah, this is feeling to me like it's getting more in the area of the stone thing. So I'll put it back on this flatten protect edge, and then just maybe make my brush size a bit smaller for this one. Okay. Maybe make it right about here. So that's, depending on the size of this, it feels like it's just kind of it is protecting this edge, I think, just like what the brush kind of says. So it's only going to push down just a little bit for us and not change that surface too much. And then so I can probably use a combination of that and then the trim dynamic. And I think this is where corners seem to get the most abuse and get hit quite a bit more than other areas. And so if you want to flatten out your corners, I think that makes sense. So keep working around here. And you can see I've got symmetry on, and at some point you could just tap X and you could break symmetry. So I would try to use symmetry as much as you possibly can until you start to notice these really obvious kind of patterns, and then break symmetry, and then start doing some difference on one side versus the other. And don't forget we're in Dynamesh mode, so you can remesh. It is also possible, and I would save this till a later stage, that we can use the clay polish, and I'll just tap that one time just to kind of crispen up the edges a little bit on that. And so I think that looks pretty good. Okay, and so I had some other details on here as well. I would like you to remember that we do have the ability to turn on polyframe. I'll turn off line so we can just see the polygroups that were generated. And so we can hold down Control and Shift, and we should be able to show and hide certain sections. I've got this under polygroups. I could actually do auto groups, and it'll just group whatever islands are visible. So that might come in handy for you. So let's see if I select this and do the auto groups again. I'm just trying to get as many pieces separated out as I possibly can. And if you do mess up your symmetry, always remember that you can use this mirror and weld. Now I just broke symmetry. I'm just going to show you for demonstration purposes. We can click mirror and weld, and so we could mirror this across, and you can see I've got my my symmetry back. I'm going to hit undo, bring this thing back like this. Just remember that you do have that at your disposal, and you could use those if you want. From here, so if I wanted to change this part on here, I was going to show you, if we hold down Control, we can drag out Marquee, and then we can hold down spacebar and we can move it here, and we can hold down Control, add spacebar, and to move it around, and if we add Alt to it, we can take away from the mask. So nothing new from the mask there. Hold down Control and just drag in the open viewport, and that will release the mask. Now what I could show you is if we hold down Control, if we go to the stroke type and we put it on curve, this might be kind of new for you. So if we hold down Control and drag out, it's going to drag this line. If you tap Alt once, it will make a curve. If you double tap Alt twice really quickly, you can add a hard edge to this. And if you hold on the spacebar, you can move this thing around. So what I'm trying to do is just build up some kind of shape. Now if I tap X and have symmetry on, the masking works with symmetry. So I can just drag out a straight line, and you can see how if we hold on Control and drag that out, we can move this out around and rotate it. So that's pretty nice. So it might assist you and help you build some really clean lines. Like I've built some straight lines here like this, and now I'm going to hold down Control, and you can see it's going to mask towards this shaded part. Now I'm going to tap Alt once, tap Alt again, and then kind of position this maybe right around here. And again, it's going to work with symmetry. Now I'm going to drag this direction because I want the shaded part to go down. So I'll tap Alt 1, 2 times like this, and you can see I'm just going to drag straight across, but I do have symmetry on, so let's see what it builds for me symmetry wise. Okay, that's not exactly what I was hoping for, so let's drag all the way across like this, and I'll use the space bar to kind of push this down. And now to get the inverse of this, I can hold down Control and then tap in the open viewport to inverse this. Okay, now because we are working with Dynamesh, and we've got this topology that's probably not the best topology in the world, but there's a lot of it there, we can make a mask and hit Control W. That will make this shape here. Now if I want to extrude this in, I can hold down Control and Shift, and let's just bring everything back. Hold down Control and Shift and just click in the open viewport to bring everything back. I'll hold down Control and Shift and select just that shape that we just made here. And I'm going to show you under Groups, under Crease, under Edge Loop. Let's do this Group Loops and put it on 1, and this Group Loops Polish, I'm going to put this down to like 4. And basically what I'm going to do with this loops 1, I'm going to hit this group loops, and it's going to make a really small, thin piece of geometry going all the way around here. And so when I do that, watch this, I'll hit group loops. It'll make this really thin piece of geometry like I was saying. But now I've got polygroup, really, really thin polygroup, and then this shape polygroup. I'll hold down Control Shift to select this, and then hold down Control, and then just tap to mask this. Now I'll bring everything back. Control Shift, click into the viewport here, and to invert the mask, if you remember, you can hit Control I, or you can hold down Control and then click on the open viewport like that. And then I can just take it on the move gizmo. If you hold down Alt and you click on the surface, it will put the move tool and it'll align it to that surface. So now I can just push this thing back in through here, and I can give it whatever depth that I want for that. And I'll hold down Control, and then we do have it on this curve, and so you can hold down Control and drag and do it again to remesh. And so we're remeshing. Now I could do this as well. So I can hold down Control and Shift, and I can click in this little tiny polygroup, hold down Control and hit this the screen, the open viewport, to mask it. Hold down Control and Shift, tap to bring everything back. Control, tap the screen to invert the mask, and then if you hold down Control and click on the mask, you can blur it. And then we can use this polish by feature that I've got on here. I'll take off this little tick in the side of the middle to make this as strong as possible, and then I'll drag this over just a little bit, and then this will make super crisp edges for me for geometry. So now I can hold down Control and then remesh if I want. And then we got new geometry to start working with, and I can take the trim dynamic and I can start hitting up the edges and roughening up the edges like what we've been doing. And if I want to pull this up in the side, remember if we hold down Alt with trim dynamic, we can pull that up and make it look as if there's weld that have happened on here. So it's going to go right up in here in the corner. Okay. All right, so the next thing that I would like to show you is how we can do some line work and we can separate things out. Okay, so if you tap B and tap C for chisel, let's let this go through the autosave, B and then C for chisel. We've got a bunch of different tip shapes that we can use for this one. I've found that I really like this brush tip 8, and it does have lazy mouse turned on. Let's just see what it gives us for the default. Okay, so that's a pretty big kind of seam that it's producing, and so I'll just use this like that, and I think it looks pretty cool. I'm just going to tap S to drop the size down. I just, for my liking, I think it's just a bit large for what I want to do for panel work on here. Okay. At this point, you might want to have higher resolution for the Dynamesh. Okay, so let's go back to our geometry. We'll close up Edge Loop, and let's go to Dynamesh, and let's put this at I'm going to put this at like around 1300 or so. And again, my numbers do not mean the same thing for your numbers potentially. I'm going to hold down Control and put this back on just the freehand, just because I think I'm kind of done with that part that we were doing for the masking there. And so we should have higher resolution geometry to work with, and I can try this out now at this point with a smaller brush, and I think this still will work at this level. If you want this to be super crisp, you're going to need more geometry, but it's going to start taxing your computer the higher you go for this stuff. So just be aware of that. And sometimes, if you saw what I did, I just smoothed the model just a little bit, and then I remeshed twice, so I could. Sometimes it just feels like Dynamesh doesn't kick in for whatever reason, so I have to do some kind of change to the model. So I usually just smooth the model just a little bit. So let's see what we got going on here. So I think that's going to be pretty cool. Now the power of this brush is, if we take this lazy step, I'm not going to put it down to 0. I'm going to put like 0.02, somewhere around there. Lazy smooth, that's on the highest it can go. I can put this around 8, and then lazy radius. Usually I do like 50 or so. Now this lazy snap, what's kind of cool about this, if you pump up this number a little bit, if you drag this out and you stop, if you got lazy snap turned on, you can go pretty close to that mark on here, and you can continue on with the shape of that. So if I were to drag like this, I can kind of keep continuing on and keep a pretty nice consistent thickness and depth and everything for that brush. So that's where that comes in handy. I'll tap S and make it a little bit larger for what I'm doing. So the other thing is, if we have lazy mouse turned on, don't put this lazy step all the way to 0, otherwise this causes issues. But if we start to drag out and hold down Shift, we can drag a line and we can make an angle for this, and then hold down Shift and then let go, and it'll go ahead and make a straight line for us. Now with that snap turned on, we could just continue this on right here like that. Now you might have noticed that it only went to a certain length and it stopped, and my line was kind of further than that. That's because of this lazy radius. So if I drag this down, it should give me the same length as what I pulled out here. So that's, if it's going a little bit shorter on you, that's what's going on for that. And then after that, you might take this and drag this up a little bit and then continue that line on just like that. Okay, so that's how I kind of did that line work. If you want to use clay polish after you've made these lines, you can make a mask. You can hold down Control and you can just drag over this, and then inverse the mask, hold down Control and click. You could smooth out the mask if you want. I might have to paint some of this back, and then we can hit clay polish, and we could even run clay polish on there, and then we can run our remeshing algorithm, and then remesh for everything like that. Before we move on to the next section, I want to show you, using the Orb brush set, how to add some very nice clean lines. So I'm going to hit the comma key and bring up Lightbox, and I'm going to go to my brushes. We've already talked about how to use the shortcut to get to somebody else's brush set. I'm going to go to the Orb. I'll use this Zbrush Crash 3, and then we've got lazy mouse turned on. I'll put the lazy step to 0.02, something very, very small. The lazy smooth, I'll put that to about 8. And this lazy radius, maybe I'll do something pretty small, like 10 or so. And then I can use the lazy snap, and I'll put that up to about 30, somewhere around there. And again, we can click and drag out, and if you hold down Shift, you can add a straight line to this. The lazy snap will allow you to click and drag off from a previous point on here, and you can see it definitely has a different look than the chisel brush. And depending on the size of your brush that you make and the strength, so I'll tap U to drag this up a little bit more intense like this. We could click and then hold down Shift, and then I'll just click and drag out. Let me do this one more time like this. And I'll go from this part and drag out, and I'll work my way around the model with this. And you can see this method will give us some really clean, very nice cuts to the model. And we can just click and drag out like that. And again, depending on the size of the brush and how strong that you have this, it's going to affect the design for things. But I just wanted to show you that this is possible. Instead of using the chisel brush, you can use some of these brush types too, and you might actually like the performance and the look of these brushes a little bit more. I do think these brushes are a little bit more forgiving as far as how much resolution that you need. You saw with the chisel brush, it did feel like you needed quite a bit of resolution on your model to get the right kind of effect for things on that. And so this is probably going to let you have a little bit less geometry to work with. The next thing I'm going to do is show you how to potentially make a custom brush that you could use to make maybe some bolts or circular patterns or something like that. That's going to be kind of up to you. So if we use the primitive type, we've already looked in the other videos on how to make a primitive type and then make a polymesh 3D out of that. So we can go ahead. I'm going to go to the initialize for this and divide. I'm just going to do 10 by 10, and then I can get some predictable results for that. Let's maybe do this. I'll do 4 and 4. So the way that this divides is a bit different than what I was expecting. So I guess if I do 5 and 5, I just want a nice split down the center like this. And then now I can say make polymesh 3D. And if I turn this on here, I got my polymesh 3D. And I'm going to go ahead and go to geometry, and I'll divide. Before I do that, I'm going to turn off this SMT. That's the smooth subdivide smooth modifier. And if I divide, turn this on. Let's turn our line on and our fill. And I keep dividing, turn that off and turn it on. You can see it's going to take each one of those quads and it's going to divide it into 4. So now with my subdivision levels, you can see it's taking this one, the next one up, it's divided that into 4. It's going to take those and divide those into 4, and it's going to keep going. So I think about subdivision level number 6 is pretty good for this. I'm going to go about this level. So if you hit Shift D, you can drop your subdivision levels down. If you tap D, you can go up in your subdivision levels. And what I'm going to do is make a polygroup for this. So I'm going to hold on Control and Shift, and I'm going to drag a marquee over these right here. So I'm holding down Control and Shift and dragging out, and then I added the spacebar modifier, and I can drag this over this like this. And that didn't grab all these, so I need to go outside of these just a little bit. And you can see I've grabbed all these, so I hit Control W, and that'll make a polygroup out of what's visible. If I hold the Control and Shift and then click that off, you can see I've made these 2 different polygroups. So now it's really easy for me to hold down Control and Shift and then select the inner part and the outer part. And now I've got subdivision levels on this too. I'm going to try to use this to my advantage if I need to kind of reset this up to a very nice square format. They've got some tools in there that I'll show you to do that. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to show you how to use radial symmetry on any of our brushes that we have. So I'm going to just put it on, let's just put it on the standard brush, and we can use the drag rectangle dots. We'll do freehand, either one, doesn't really matter. And if we turn on symmetry, you can see I've got it on my interface here. We've got X symmetry turned on. But this time we're going to go to transform. We're going to go to this palette. I'm going to go ahead and click this right here and click and drag it over here to this part of this interface. And with activate symmetry turned on, I'm going to turn on radial symmetry, and I'll put the radial symmetry on the Z axis. Actually, I'll turn it off X and then just have it on Z. You can see this radial count is set to 8, and if I put that up to something like 32, I'm going to get 32 little brushes that we can start working with. So you can see how we can start to build this up. If we hold down Alt, we can dig in. So we could do some pretty cool shapes pretty quickly, like as if we were going to do some kind of bolt structure or something like that. And so I'll just raise the surface up and through the center here like this. And it also works with smoothing. So if we make the brush larger and pull this out and then kind of smooth this, it will work also with trim dynamic. And so you can see it, I just don't have enough resolution right now. So what I'm going to do, before I go too far on this, I'm going to go and add some more subdivision levels. So I'm going to hit divide, but before I do that, I'll turn it off this SMT. I already got that off, and I'll divide. Let's do 2 more like that, and I can hold down Shift and kind of lightly smooth some of this stuff out, just like that. Put it on trim dynamic, and I'm going to push this surface down here just a little bit. Push this one down here. I'm going to push here. Then here like this. So it's kind of interesting. If you've ever had clay on a wheel and push clay around like this, it has a similar feeling to that in some kind of ways. So I'm being very, very light with the strokes that I'm pushing on here. So we can take this and If I go too heavy-handed with it, it's going to push out too far. So I think that's pretty good. I'll maybe put on Damien Standard, see if I can push this in just a little bit more. Right through there. And if I hold down Alt with this one, I can drag that part up and maybe put it back on Trim Dynamic. Push it down. So we've got on 32. If I go to 64, we can go even higher with this, and you might get better results like that. And then, so this next part could be a little bit tricky. If I tap P, I need to capture this, and I need to capture it in an alpha that I want to use. So it's possible within the alpha, you can use this grab doc, and it'll grab the resolution of the document. Now I want to force this into a square format, and what I was showing you with this this thing that we got here, if we hold down Control and Shift and select that, I'll mask this, hold down Control, Shift, click, bring everything back, hold down Control, blur my mask, hold down Control, click in the viewport, and then I'll invert my mask. And I did all that. As time goes on, this gets really quick to do this stuff. But what I'm going to do with the deformation, I'm going to, not use squeeze, sorry. I'm going to use this morph to grid, and if I do that, if there's any problems with what's going on with the geo, like if I move this stuff on purpose just to show, if I use this morph to grid, it will force everything into back into its shape. And why that comes in handy is because we want to make a really clean alpha, and we don't want to have any kind of problems with depth or anything. So basically we're going to capture depth, and depth is the distance from the camera, and it'll make a black and white image. So anything that's closer to the camera is going to be white, anything that's recessed away from the camera will be black. And we can use that as an alpha, and we can start capturing some of these shapes that you would be sculpting like this, and we can turn those into brushes. Now to capture this stuff, we have to change our document, and this is where ZBrush becomes a little bit confusing for people. ZBrush has got this 2.5D mode, and so basically as we change our document, I'm going to turn off this proportion, and I'm going to put this on 1024 by 1024, and I'll click resize for my document. It'll say, hey, you're going to change your document size and it's undoable. Turn my cursor white, and it's got this junk on the screen. If I hit Control N, that's going to clear this out. It's actually under layer, it's clear. That's the hotkey for this. Now if we click and drag out, we're going to drag multiple copies of this. We're actually just dragging out pixel data. Like if you're in Photoshop or some other painting program, this is not a 3D object yet. It's just 2D pixel data. So this is where it becomes kind of confusing. I'm going to hit Control N to clear out again, and I can click and drag out one copy. And if I want to go back into the 3D edit mode for this, I can go up to here to edit, or you can tap T, and you can see our cursor should turn red, and we're back in the 3D mode. And I turn perspective off. You can turn perspective on and off by tapping P, and I can tap F to frame in on this perfect square. And at that point, I know this was a lot of work to get to this point here. I'm going to put on the standard brush. I'm going to go to alpha. I'll click alpha, and I'll say grab doc, and you can see it's going to grab the depth information for us and make a nice alpha for us at that point. I have it on the standard brush, and what I like to do, I like to turn this into a brush. So if you don't want to overwrite the standard brush for this session, you can go to brush, you can go to clone, and so it's going to take that standard brush and it cloned it, and you can see it put a number 1 at the end of it. Stroke type, I'm going to put this on drag rectangle, and then I'm going to turn it off the Radial Symmetry. So I'm going to turn that off, and I'll turn off symmetry altogether, and I'll just drag out one copy, and you can see what I'm dragging out here like this. And if you remember from the earlier videos where we looked at the orb technique, this is clicking and dragging out. I'm going to take the focal shift and I'll put that down to 0, and I might crank up my Z intensity a little bit like this, and you can see it's bulging out the surface a little bit, and that's not what I want for this. So I need to go to alpha. I'm going to click and drag this over, and then I'm going to go to modify, And then I'm going to go to this mid value and I'll put this at 50. Let's try this out and see if this works. And it looks better, I think. Let's try a little bit higher. I just think there's probably going to be maybe a sweet spot for us. And I think, again, I don't know the exact reason or why we need to pick certain values, but I usually try to eyeball and it usually works fairly well. And if you want to fade the edges or feather the edges just a little bit, you can do this RF, and that will do a radial fade along the outer edge, and that can kind of help get rid of any kind of artifacts. And then once I'm done with this and I like what I've got, we can also do this under transfer. We can click this make modified alpha, and you can see it just changed it. If we go within here, this is the new modified alpha that it just made with all those changes that we did. And now we can click and drag out, and let's go back to the modify, and then we've got this still this mid distance, and I might have to switch this. Usually you would make the modified alpha and you wouldn't have to mess around with these things too much. So I'm going to go right back to this 64 like this. And if I'm happy with the settings for this, I can go to brush and I can do a save as, and then we can save our brushes. And I've always saving in a particular area. It takes a little bit of work to get these things set up, so might as well save the work. And let's just see this. I'll just call this Nick Z drag bolt, something like that. So you can call it whatever you want for yours. And then now that that's made, I can go back to my document. It depends on what your screen resolution is that you're working with. I think I'm going to do something like this, and then resize it. Hit Control N to clear the canvas. Draw this out on the screen one time. So unfortunately, Zbrush just crashed on me, but just load the program back up. A lot of times Zbrush is pretty good about when it does crash, that you can go to your quick saves and there will be a version of that model. So I was able to load that up, and I did save that brush out before we started too. So I'm going to go to show you. I'll just take this brush, I'll clone it again. So we got a new standard, and I'll go to brush and I'll load brush. And I'll go to that area where I saved this thing out. And go to the standard brushes, drag rectangle, and I called this, let's just do date modified, and find that brush. And so we can load that brush up. Now I did lose some of the little bit of the line work that I was drawing on there, but basically what I wanted to show you is that we now have a brush that we can just click and drag out, and we can add new kind of details to our model. And so this becomes our tertiary kind of details that we have depending on the size that you make for it. Now if you have it on drag rectangle, we can drag this thing out. Now if there was different details on here, you could spin it and you can kind of rotate the thing around, but we don't. So it's actually working, you just can't see it. If we want very consistent sized drags for this, we can do drag dot. And if we click and drag out, you can see it's going to make the same exact size for us. If I make that a little bit smaller, we could drag out something like this. So then that way, if you want to make sure for your design, if you're, you're trying to make it look as if somebody's made rivets or they've made bolts or something like that, you can drag out very consistent sized strokes, and no matter where you move around the model. You'll go ahead and put those on. I'll take it off lazy mouse for this at this point, and then just work around these corners that you see here. And just like the cooking show, I did already have one kind of already made up, so I can go to that and you can see the line work that was produced for this. I didn't do any of the bolt information. I don't think I've really got that on there. So that's just something if I wanted to add some of those touches to this design, I could potentially put maybe some of these in the corners, something like that, and kind of just finish this thing out like this. But it's really up to you what you want to create for those type of details on there. And I'm going to take it off solo and then bring everything back like this. And you can see this is what I created for these things. The only other thing that I kind of really did, I added some extra smaller shapes on here. I did a little bit of Z modeling with this triangle shape that you see. And I used the primitive type for the rings to add a little bit within here. I added some lines and grooves to this sphere using the same techniques that I just recently showed you. And for the base, if we take a look at this, what I incorporated with this, I took one of the ring 3Ds, the primitive types, and I made it really, really large, kind of made it kind of skinnier for the radius for this, and then just added those details to the outer part to make this thing look just a little bit more complex. And then under draw, you can see on my interface, I've got select cameras, store cameras, and I'm storing camera positions on here for these things. And then I can get pretty nice renders. And we've looked at the rendering. We'll get a little bit more in depth in the next video on material creation and also for rendering on these things. Okay, but this is going to give you everything that you kind of need to take your parts and your pieces and push them to the next level. Add some shape breakup for these larger shapes and how you can manage multiple pieces. Make sure that you're doing everything you can to keep ZBrush running as efficient as you possibly can, and manage your parts a little bit better and get really nice detail on your models.